the mystical journey. Today we have Teofilo Ruiz, right? But everyone calls you Teo. A wonderful professor at UCLA, the recipient of many awards and recognitions, won by Obama, right? A medal.
2012.
Yes, and specialized in medieval time history. So I'm going to let maybe you tell everyone what is your specialty in exactly.
Well, I am a, a social historian, which of course includes things such as the witch craze and things like that. Of the late medieval and early modern period, I worked mostly on the Iberian Peninsula, but until my retirement in November of 2019, I taught for 42 years a class on mystics, heretics, and witches, which examines the development of mysticism between 1000 and 1700, of apocalyptic movements and heresy in the same period, and then which looks very sort of focused on the witch craze, this period in which mostly elderly women were brought to trial and condemned for engaging in relations with Satan, and most often either burned at the stake or, if they were in England, hang from the neck.
Yeah, so because our video cast is called The Mystical Journey, we want to see how far back you can take us in, the mystical journey, either the mystics or the witches. So how far back can you go
Well, I
in?
think that there are two questions here. How
Yeah.
far can you go back worldwide, globally, or how
Well,
far can you go back in the Western tradition?
I'm thinking of you and what you are studying, because of course you can go back, you know,
Yes, indeed. And I wanted to say that one of the classes I have taught and I still may teach is a world history class. And I spend a lot of time talking about spirituality in Indian culture and in Egyptian culture and in Mesopotamian culture, mostly in Indian culture where this is very prevalent. And when you think of something like the teachings of the Buddha or the teachings of the Maharivi, which is the Jain religion, or the Gita, you could see that a great deal of this influenced the West. But if we go to the West and we think of the West, and I think that there are raptures and moments of essentially in bacchanalias in the Greek world in which people essentially lose a sense of themselves. This is what is called the Dionysian moment as opposed to Apollonian one. Apollonian is the kind of rational poetry. The Dionysian is the intoxicating feeling of drinking and community. So you could see that there are elements like this. And it is very obvious to me, I am teaching right now a small little class on the Republic by Plato, that though Plato was not a mystic by any means, nonetheless, there are elements of mysticism, mostly from the East, that percolates throughout his work. And the Republic ends with this myth of Earth, which is a myth about transmigration, which Plato has borrowed from Pythagoras, and which Pythagoras have borrowed from the East. You know, the ideas flow through the roads, the mercantile routes and things like that, and there is a great deal of interaction between the worlds. There are mystics in the early church, and of course the monks who live in isolation in the Sinai around the 300s. There is the mysticism of someone like St. Augustine. And then for a period between the very late Roman Empire, the 4th or 5th century, and the 11th or late 11th or 12th century, there's really no evidence. That is to say, there is no written evidence of mystical beliefs. There is a tradition, I think you are interested in healing. There's a tradition of folklore or herbal lore that is prevalent in the West throughout all this period, and which goes back to pre-Christian times. And it is the ability of elderly women to be engaged in healing and by the use of herbs and incantations and things like that. But the real way in which we can identify these things begins around the 12th century. and continues into the witch craze. One of the things that women are accused of doing is practicing medicine on the edges of the town and getting into trouble with the inquisitors or with the authorities who want to patrol and control these kind of things. And it has a great deal to do with gender. That is to say, it is the target for all these accusations are usually women. I am talking all over the place, and I think what I want to do is either answer any particular question you have or essentially focus on very specific things.
So I remember reading that one of the reasons for the witch craze is that the church uh, was trying to have control and said that God had control over whether you got better or not. Can you expand on that? I mean, is it some?
Well, the problem there is a presence of witchcraft, and there is a discourse on witchcraft that begins to emerge around the 13th century in Thomas Aquinas, and that acquires this kind of true personality in the late 15th century. And the witch craze is between 1486 and in Europe until 1660s, and in places like Salem until the 1690s. But there has always been in the West, in Western culture, an acceptance of the idea of witchcraft. And in fact, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, King Saul, who is the king of Israel, goes to the cave of the witch of Endor and dances, trying to get her support. But it is usually in the West associated with certain, with women and associated with age. And this is the manner in which it's represented. Now, there are two things here which are, I want to keep them separate, but they are connected in the issue of healing. In the 12th century, for very complicated reasons, there is this incredible outburst of mystical writings and mystical beliefs. And one of the things that is associated with these mystics is that not unlike in the New Testament, in the Gospels, where Jesus can actually heal and cure by the touch or by simple words, many of these mystics, I'm thinking specifically of St. Francis of Assisi, who lives in the 12th and early 13th century, are able to cure the ill or to do miracles, mostly because they are conduits for the power of God. Now, in the witch craze, and you asked me something about the witch craze, and now I missed the question that you asked me.
I have a quick question too. I forget exactly what era because I don't remember dates that well. But because, for example, I read Hildegard von Bingen, who was
Yes,
who was also documenting all kinds of healing. I mean, she said she was channeling, but she was also at the convent, like she was also in the religious orders. Um,
Hildegard of Hildegard of Bingen is one of the most important mystics of the 12th century. She was a musician. She wrote music, which we still could hear and perform, and she was a doctor. And Hildegard of Bingen belongs to a series of female mystics in the 12th century that do two things. One is that many of these mystics, not Hildegard herself, but some of the mystics that are contemporary to Hildegard, argue that they can live just by taking the host, by having communion.
uh-huh.
That is to say, that the sacrament is sufficient to that. And they are given to visions, and they also are healers. Hildegard of Bingen is a doctor and therefore writes on medicine as well and on healing, and is very well educated. But Hildegard of Bingen is also of great importance because in the ancient world, in Greece and Rome and so on, it had long been decided that should we say, the quickening of life resided in the male semen, and the woman was essentially a receptacle. Plato, who was a feminist before feminism even existed, because he believes in the equality of men and women, they should be trained the same way and then they can do the same job. argues that the only difference between men and females was that man begets, he creates, and women essentially puts it out. She's a receptacle. And it is Hildegard of Bingen, the first person in the Western world who argues for the role of females in reproduction. Moreover, she is the one who argues that it is females, through the Virgin Mary or through Eve, essentially, that mankind comes into being. That is to say, Jesus is born of a woman, of flesh, of the flesh of a woman, not from the flesh of a man. And so it gives a kind of important position to women in 12th century society, which is also parallel by courtly love and the romances of the period that also tend to privilege the position of women. For example, and then I will go to the witchcraft part. For example, in a romance such as Tristan by Godfrey from Strasbourg, one of the most important romances of the period, Queen Isolde, who is the Queen of Ireland and living in Dublin, and her daughter Isolde, who essentially will eventually have a relationship or an adulterous affair with Tristan, are both healers. They can cure. And in fact, when Tristan is dying from a poison shard of a lance that is in his body, he goes to Ireland to be cured by Queen Isolde. So that there is this Celtic, long Celtic tradition of the role of at least certain women as having healing powers, knowing lore which is not accessible to males, and so on. And so you never hear in the Middle Ages or in the early modern period of males who live on the edge of towns and who engage in curing or healing people. So it is a very gender specific thing. I go back now to the question that you ask, which I think is important. Did the church want to control this? The witch craze is a very interesting historical phenomenon, a horrid one. Probably close to 100,000 people, mostly elderly women, were killed between 1486 and the 1660s, 1670s, which in a world that does not have the technology for large executions of people is quite a significant number of people who have been killed in this period. One of the things is that one of the arguments for the emergence of the witch craze, the persecution of witches. They have always been witches, but they are not being persecuted in the same fashion. And they're certainly not being massively persecuted and executed. One of the things is that in the late 15th century, the church, Christianity, Catholicism, comes face to face with the culture of the mountains. What I mean to say is that the church is a civilization of the plains, of the cities. But in the great wave of attempts to spread Christianity into areas that have been only half Christianized, missionaries, Dominicans, and Franciscans go out into mountain regions. And when they get there, they encounter and they discover all these practices, which are essentially practices that tie these societies to a pre-Christian past, to a kind of prehistoric agricultural cults, most of which are related to questions of fertility, the fertility of the soil, and so on. These missionaries don't know what to do with this. This is so bizarre. There is a wonderful book about this by Carlo Ginzburg called Night Battles in English, but in Italian, Il Benandanti, which talks about how the survival of all these pre-Christian beliefs, these agricultural cults. So these missionaries encounter all these things and they return to Rome and they write a book called the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of the Witches, which is divided into three parts. The first part is, how do you recognize a witch? How do you deal with them judicially? in the courts, how do you essentially find them guilty, and third, how you can protect yourself from the wiles of witches. Now, one of the things about this book, which is really a riot, is that the two writers, who are Jacob Sprenger and Heinrich Kramer, is that they are profoundly misogynist. That it is always essentially one of the things that it reflects is the fear of women and the fear of women in terms of sexuality. So a good number of the stories are about witches being able to make by magic your organs disappear, and this or make you impotent. And this goes back to Aquinas. It's a slow developing of a witch anti-witch discourse. But this is not the only explanation. The end of the Middle Ages is also a tremendously difficult period, because the basic structure of medieval society was a village community, and it begins to be essentially destroyed and transformed at the end of the 15th century by the rise of well-to-do farmers as opposed to poor farmers. So the number of people who are poor begins to grow exponentially by the end of the 15th century. You also have the discovery of America, and in 1521, the breakdown of Christendom between Protestants and Catholics. Now, I have to say to you that Catholics and Protestants, both of them, deal with witches in the same fashion, in the same harsh fashion. But the greatest attacks on women who were accused of being witches occur mostly in the north of Europe, not in the south, not in. And the religious wars is one of these kind of things that trigger a great deal of the attacks against women. Now, all these women are accused of many things. They are usually women who live without the control of a man. They live by themselves. They don't live with their families. They live on the edges of towns. They collect herbs. They do things such as deliver babies, which is why essentially some of the people who get it in the neck are the women who deliver babies. They are accused of killing the babies and taking them to extinction. But they also are engaged in healing. To complicate matters even better, more, this is precisely the period in which the medical profession begins to become, so we say, professionalized. And the women are competitors on the art of healing. They don't go to the universities, they don't take courses, they just know how to use certain herbs. This has a long, long life, because I remember as a child how certain elderly women in my hometown were able to cure you of such things as belly aches, or put some kind of plants. Rosemary is a very common one, or make you smell certain things. And the way they work and operated into 10 years ago, because I think and of course in other parts of the world to this very day, they operated as a kind of alternate form of medicine. And we now have it again in our society, right? We have alternative medicine, which is natural medicine as opposed to drug induced. I'm talking too much. Ask me questions.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating.
It's great that it was able to survive, and thrive in some way. And you're right, it's coming back. And I think people are realizing that, you can get a lot through natural medicine. You don't need to, sometimes
Yes.
of the conventional medicine is a little bit much.
Well,
I just read a book like that's called Ipathia's Heritage. It's an older book, and they had a section on there. I mean, it's mostly about women, scientists, biologists, all that, up until the 19th century, that were always put to the side, or because there were women. And they talk. There's that one section where they had forbidden women to help for childbirth. And it's and so having a man helping with childbirth that does not know as much of a human of a woman's body compared, so I mean, I know I'm veering off
about
subject a
uh,
little bit, but it's really fascinating. how the
And
control.
yes, the women who essentially are the experts on birth are excluded from these activities. And this had a great deal to do with the accusations of witchcraft. Now, we know that infant mortality is very, very high in this period, extremely high. And so for a child to survive beyond 1 year was very rare, and many are born. And there is also a great deal of infanticide. So one of the things that you're going to do is you're going to depict the women who are engaged in the business of reproduction. You're going to accuse them of either killing babies, stealing them, bringing them to the gatherings, nocturnal gatherings of witches. All this is the fantasies of, there is no evidence that they were, this is the question that I always ask my students. Were there witches? Were there people who believed that they were witches? Yes, they exist to this very day. They are, some of them are even in Congress.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
were people who believed themselves to be witches? Of course there was, but do I believe or do I think, as a historian, having seen many of these documents, that there are people who go on the back of demons and fly to nocturnal gathering? Of course not. This is because all the evidence we have it from the enemies, from the people who wrote against this, and they're all male. And it is remarkable. It's only in the last 30 years or so, and of course, far more so in Europe, where becoming a doctor doesn't make you necessarily rich immediately, but that the number of male to female ratio of male to female in the medical practices was completely askew, and it's only very recently that you get as many women doctors as you get male doctors. And why would you want to go to a gynecologist or an obstetrics who is a male? I mean, we know now all the things, all the problems that brings about. So, but that is also a kind of consequence of the cultural transformations of European society in the late 15th and early 16th century, where they are going to be driven out from the healing arts. They're going to be driven out from attending to the birth of babies.
Theo, can I ask you something? I mean, I'm not sure if you have an answer to this, but the word witch, where does it come?
It's a Celtic word.
Okay.
My belief is that it's a Celtic word. It's very simple. Remember, witches in English, the word in French is very different.
Mm-hmm.
The word in Spanish is very different.
Yeah, that's true.
The word in Italian is very different. The English form of it, if I understand it correctly, is a Celtic derivative. And it's the manner in which the church, as it becomes the hegemonic intellectual and cultural force in the medieval West, begins to define and represent others as being part of darkness or the devil and things like that. Including in this is the survival of Celtic kind of practices, especially in the countryside, which are related to Celtic lore and things like that. Or I think, for example, of Nordic religions, that we know them only through the mediation of Christian authors. That is to say, we don't have anybody who was practicing the religion who wrote a book and explained to us what it was. So what we see has to be seen very critically. But in that Nordic pantheon of gods and goddesses, many of the goddesses were child maidens. They were fighters. They were warriors. And in fact, half of their heroes who go to Valhalla, and the other half go to Freya's field, where they wait for the moment of Ragnarok, when they go fight on the side of Odin against trolls and giants and all the evil forces of the world. So it is Christianity that devalues are really Abrahamic religions, Judaism and Islam and Christianity, that devalues the role and place of women in society. And it's not until the 12th century in the West when romances essentially tried to, and the cult of the Virgin Mary and so on, come popular. But being on a pedestal is not being equal.
Yeah.
And there is also a tremendous reaction, which is anti-female.
Yeah,
You
mostly
know,
because they
which
still say God makes miracles, Jesus makes miracles, or creates miracles, or heals people, but then the female is a witch. Like
yes.
it's
Well,
it's
the Virgin can, the Virgin cannot cure you, but the Virgin can listen to your prayers and intercede for you. But it's only in the 12th century. And if you look at the history of the West, I mean, both, we are really the combination of three things. But the two important ones are the classical tradition, and the second one is, of course, religion, Christianity, the Jewish background, and then, of course, Christianity itself. And both of them are profoundly misogynist. Of course, they are the example of the heroic women here and there and so on, but there is in the Orestiaia, which is the accounts of Orestes. Orestes is the son of Agamemnon. And when Agamemnon returns home, his wife, who is Orestes' mother, kills Agamemnon and her lover. Her name is Clytemnestra, and Orestes kills her and then flees, pursued by the Furies. And he gets to Athens, which was, for all this nonsense about Athenian democracy, was a profoundly anti-women society. And the Areopagus, which is a tribunal sitting in the Acropolis, says, no, 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 no guilt here because you are the son of Agamemnon. He is the one who gave you life, and your mother was just simply a receptacle
yeah.
that allows you. And of course, if you think about the book of Genesis, or think about Saint Paul saying women should be quiet and don't interfere with the services and things like that. But in Genesis, there are two accounts of the making of mankind. One is the oldest one, and of course, the people who compiled the Old Testament in Babylon around 500 kept both versions, except that, of course, most people would tell you that there is only one version, and it's a version they know. But there are two versions. One is very short. God created man, male and female, he created them. Kind of dual creation. Male and women are created at the same time equally. The other one is a story that we all know. He creates Adam. Adam is alone in this paradise. He decides to create something from out of Adam. The word woman is also a Celtic origin of man. It's not unlike the handmaid tale,
Mm.
in which you are Offred of Glen or something like that. And that's the normative story throughout the history of the West. The subordination of women to males and things like that. So healing, wish craze, mysticism is deeply important in terms of gender. There's something else too, which is that women live longer, and they are around the end of the 15th century, there are far more women than males. And that creates, I am completely confused because every time I look at the screen, I see the hand up and I say, oh, what?
We want to ask a question.
So I have been all over the place, but so you can be very
Yeah,
specific.
this is fascinating. I mean, really, really.
So I'm just curious. So, just to kind of wrap it up, um, because I mean, of course, you're studying, the past. But if you go back to your childhood, because you took us there for a little bit of the time where you said that there were women, so you grew up in Cuba. Um,
Yes.
so did you have any experiences like that as a child? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
was
Yeah.
it very, very common?
It's very common.
Yeah.
And, we were well off or a sort of a substantial social status. Didn't really matter. One of the things that, of course, that is unique to Cuba or Brazil or Haiti is the survival of African religions
Mhm.
and the mixing of African religions with Christian ones. And one of the things, of course, is that in African religions, some of the orishas, the gods,
Yeah.
change the gender. Shango can be 6 months male and 6 months female. It kind of. So I remember as a child that there were certain practices. I have a tummy ache, so somebody will rub my tummy, but not anybody will rub my tummy. It's a special woman, an Afro-Cuban woman who might even pronounce some words in Yoruba. And, we had doctors and all that, but that would be acceptable. That is the case in village societies until very, very recently. That the permanence of the past in the present is extraordinary. I don't talk about the revival of Wicca or healing arts or natural medicine or anything like that, which is a more sophisticated one. I'm talking about village societies. I'm sure that if you go to some mountain areas in France,
Oh
which
yeah,
is such.
I was healed. I was healed by what we call a rebouteux in Brittany. From the south.
Yeah, Brittany, Celtic homeland.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was healing all the elderly in his village from arthritis, all kinds of joint pains and everything.
Yeah. It's Brittany being isolated from the rest of France, or at least more backward than the rest of
Yeah.
France. There is it's still village society that is still alive, and it
Very,
has also that kind of Celtic inheritance that is present in Ireland and Cornwall and Galicia, which these things also go on in northwestern Spain, which is also a Celtic homeland, and it is, and in Italy, of course, this is very present.
Yeah.
yeah.
So these things have very long legs, and they are unfortunately they are being erased because village societies are dying all throughout. The village of your ancestors in France is now a place where people go for the summers
Yeah.
as a tourist, but no longer where people live in close contact with the land. Although France is one of those places that has a strong farm connections. Farmers are important in France to this very day. But look what's happening here in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and our idea is to find people from all over and have have them on and talk, and
But you're in California.
we're in California.
Uh, so you're in California. California has also a very rich tradition because immigrants from Central America
Yeah.
and Mexico, who are essentially many of them of native origin, they have connecting to a past that is an alternate to the present.
Yes.
So you get an old person and she or he will know a lot about many of these things.
Yeah. 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 No, definitely a lot of interesting things.
Yes.
Yes. Well, do you have anything else to ask, Theo?
I could ask like
Yeah,
questions for another
we
2
could stay
hours
with you for a long
because this
time.
is I mean, to me, it's like it's really interesting. The beginning of what we call, like, what they called witches, and the history, and seeing the parallel between all the different religions or belief systems throughout the world. It's I could listen to you for hours. Maybe we need to have another
Yes.
another thing with you
Well,
talking about.
I will leave you with one thing, which is I forgot to say, which is of course witchcraft as we understand it. The witchcraft as is defined in the 16th century by someone named Jean Baudin, a French lawyer, is that you promise to do some evil by having contact with the devil.
Yeah.
So you essentially, through the ceremonies of becoming a witch, you swear your allegiance to Satan. Now, this is a bit complicated because Satan, of course, is supposed to be on the God. So, and God is all powerful. How can Satan do this unless he has the permission of God? So there's something very complicated about the arguments for this. Nonetheless, because witchcraft, as defined in the West, is these connections to Satan and to the devil, and you do evil things to please the devil or to get something in reward. This definition is applied to other places in the world where it doesn't fit. So when Europeans get to Africa or to India or to the New World, they accuse many people of engaging in witchcraft. But it has nothing to do with witchcraft. It's a different religion, different practices, but it's one of the manners in which you legitimize conquest.
Yeah.
You legitimize your power over others.
Mm. Yeah.
I am delighted to meet Coralie's sister,
Chloe, yeah. I'm Chloe.
Noe.
Me too.
It's so nice to see you, Theo.
It's wonderful to see you. Maybe soon we will be back into action. I just got a shot, so I'm waiting for my second one.
Okay, so maybe next time we meet in person and we can do the video in person, and it may be in France. On the chemin postel. How about that?
Absolutely.
Merci Théo.
Merci à vous.
Merci
Bye.
beaucoup.
Bye.
Au revoir.